Don Bryant, a name that once echoed through the streets of Memphis, was a legend in the world of soul music. But the story of Don Bryant is not just about his music. It's about the twists and turns of life that shaped him into the icon we remember today. You won't believe the incredible journey he went through to become one of the greatest artists of his time. Let me tell you about his rise to fame, which started long before he became a household name. Don's love for music began at an early age. Growing up in Memphis, he was surrounded by the sounds of gospel music. His father, a member of the Four Stars of Harmony, would rehearse in their home, filling the space with soulful harmonies. It's no wonder that music became such an important part of Don's life. He and his brothers would often try to imitate what they heard, practicing their harmonies and dreaming of one day making it big. That's when the passion started. At a young age, he was already deep in the music scene, learning from the best and dreaming of a future in music. But here's where the story takes a turn. While many of his peers were content with following in the footsteps of their parents, Don wasn't satisfied with just singing gospel. He wanted more. At a time when Memphis was becoming the heartbeat of soul and R&B, Don knew he had to take a leap of faith. He wasn't just a kid with a dream. He was determined to make music his career. This is where destiny truly began to unfold. In the early 1960s, Don made the bold decision to transition from gospel to secular music. He wanted to create something different, something that spoke to the people, and he found his chance when he met Willie Mitchell. Mitchell, a prominent producer at High Records, was the man who would help shape Don's career. Under Mitchell's guidance, Don started performing with Mitchell's band, the Four Kings. The rest, as they say, was history. But you won't believe how the music world opened up for Don. He didn't just stay in the background, he moved into the spotlight. He was writing and performing hits, not just for himself, but for some of the most iconic artists of his time. From Solomon Burke to Albert King, Don's songwriting was everywhere. But it wasn't just about the fame or the money for him, it was about the music, the love for his craft. As he wrote for others, he discovered something deeper about himself. He was meant to tell stories through song. And then came his collaboration with someone who would change his life forever. In the early 1970s, Don met Ann Peebles, a young soul singer who would soon become his muse, his partner, and his wife. The moment he heard Ann sing, it was like the universe aligned. He said it himself. I fell in love with Ann then, when I heard her sing. It was as if their destinies were intertwined. Don wasn't just writing for her, he was writing for their future. And that future was filled with love, music, and a shared passion for creating timeless soul. It didn't take long for their relationship to blossom. In 1974, Don and Ann tied the knot, and from that moment they were inseparable, both in music and in life. Don was by Ann's side, helping her create some of the most iconic songs in the soul genre, including 99 Pounds, which became an instant classic. But it wasn't just about the music. Their partnership was something deeper, something built on trust and admiration. And while Don was busy supporting Ann's career, he was also making a name for himself as a songwriter and performer, leaving his mark on the world of R&B. But here's the shocking part. While Don and Ann's career was taking off, Don's own solo career was beginning to fade into the background. As the 70s came to a close, Don decided to focus more on writing and producing for other artists rather than continuing his own career as a performer. He could have continued to pursue fame, but instead he chose a different path, one where he could share his gift with the world in a more subtle, behind-the-scenes way. He poured his heart into writing songs that would shape the sound of soul music for generations to come. What makes this story different is the way Don never truly left the music scene. Even though he wasn't in the spotlight, his influence was everywhere. He was the man behind some of the greatest hits, not just for Ann, but for countless other artists. And yet, as the years passed, it seemed as though Don was content with his place in history. But just when you think the story's over, something unexpected happened. In his later years, after Ann suffered a stroke in 2012, Don returned to music. You see, Ann had always been the star in their relationship, and Don had quietly stepped back to support her. But with her health challenges, Don found himself slowly making his way back to the stage, doing guest appearances with the Bokies, a Memphis R&B band that had become a part of his legacy. But what you won't believe is that this wasn't just a return to performing, it was the beginning of a major comeback. You heard that right. At the age of 78, Don Bryant released his first solo album in decades, and it was a hit. Don't Give Up on Love became a critical success, proving that Don's voice and songwriting were as powerful as ever. He wasn't just reminiscing about the past, he was living in the present, proving to himself and to the world that the soul of Memphis was still alive in him. This is where it gets interesting. Don wasn't just making music for himself. He was doing it for the love of his craft, for the love of his fans, and for the love of Ann. The comeback story of Don Bryant is one of resilience, passion, and a love that never fades. He proved that no matter how old you are, it's never too late to live your dream. As Don Bryant's career continued to unfold, there was one thing that remained constant: his deep love for Ann Peebles. But their connection wasn't just about music. No, it was about something far deeper. It was a bond that seemed destined, one that was written in the stars. But here's where the real twist lies. Don didn't just fall in love with Ann's voice, he fell in love with the woman who would become his greatest partner in life. And it all started when he first heard her sing. Don always said, "I fell in love with Ann then when I heard her sing." Imagine hearing a voice that could stop time, one that would stir something deep within you. For Don, it wasn't just about the melody, it was about the connection they shared through music. When Ann stepped onto the scene, she was a force to be reckoned with. Her voice was raw, powerful, and unlike anything the world had ever heard. And Don, who had already been part of the music world for years, was immediately captivated. But you won't believe what happened next. Ann wasn't just another artist for Don, she became his muse, the woman who would inspire him to write some of the most iconic songs of their era. It wasn't long before the chemistry between them grew, not just professionally, but personally. The music they created together, including the classic 99 Pounds, was more than just a hit. It was the soundtrack of their love story. But don't be fooled, this was no ordinary love story. It was the kind of partnership that goes beyond the spotlight, beyond the fame. It was built on trust, support, and a shared passion for soul music. And the way they supported each other, both on stage and off, was something truly special. But here's where the story takes another twist. The fame that Ann and Don shared wasn't without its challenges. While Ann was climbing the ladder to stardom, Don quietly stayed in the background, supporting her every step of the way. It wasn't just about his own career, it was about their shared journey. And while Don had the talent and the voice to be a star on his own, he chose to put Ann's career first. It was a selfless act of love, one that few people would truly understand. But in doing so, he showed the world what true love looks like. As the years passed, Ann and Don's relationship continued to grow even through the toughest of times. But nothing could prepare them for the day when Ann suffered a stroke in 2012. It was a heartbreaking moment that changed everything. The woman who had been the heartbeat of their music, the woman who had inspired so many of Don's greatest hits, was suddenly unable to perform. But here's where the story takes a surprising turn. Instead of stepping away from the music world, Don returned to it. You won't believe how Don's return to music was anything but ordinary. After years of putting his career on hold to support Ann, Don found himself back in the spotlight, this time not just as her husband, but as a solo artist. With Ann's blessing, Don started performing again, initially doing guest appearances with the Bokeys, a Memphis R&B band that had gained popularity in the area. But that wasn't the end of it. In fact, it was just the beginning of a comeback that no one saw coming. At the age of 78, Don Bryant released his first solo album in decades. It was a moment that not only surprised fans, but shocked the music world. Don't Give Up on Love, released in 2017, was his first solo LP in 48 years. You heard that right, 48 years. And it was a hit. The album was met with critical acclaim, and Don's voice, as powerful as ever, touched the hearts of people around the world. It wasn't just a return to music, it was a reaffirmation of Don's place in the soul music legacy. He wasn't just reminiscing about the past, he was making new music, adding to a legacy that had already spanned decades. But here's the kicker. Don's return wasn't just about reliving old memories or grabbing a piece of the spotlight. No, it was about proving to himself and to the world that he still had it. At 78, he was able to create music that resonated with people, bringing a fresh new energy to the stage, and the fans loved it. The album went on to become a critical success, cementing Don's legacy as one of the greatest soul artists of all time. But you won't believe what happened next. The crazy part? This album didn't just put Don back in the public eye, it ignited a resurgence in his career. He began touring again, and this time, the audiences were different. The people who had grown up listening to his music were now bringing their children to see him perform. Don wasn't just playing to a crowd of fans, he was playing to generations of listeners who had been moved by his music. And this comeback didn't just stop at one album. In 2021, Don released another record, You Make Me Feel, which once again showcased his incredible talent. The album featured new songs as well as reworked classics from his past. It was like a love letter to his fans, a reminder of the timeless soul he had created over the years. And once again, the album was nominated for a Grammy in the Best Traditional Blues Album category. But here's where it gets really interesting. Don's late career renaissance wasn't just about making music. It was about proving that it's never too late to follow your passion. And in Don's case, his passion for music, his love for Anne, and his resilience in the face of adversity were the driving forces behind everything he did. Don showed the world that age is just a number, and that as long as you have the drive and the love for what you do, you can achieve anything. As Don Bryant's comeback story continued, the unexpected twist of fate in his life seemed almost too good to be true. His return to the music scene wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a moment that took everyone by surprise. But here's where things get even more fascinating. After years of stepping away from the limelight to support his wife Ann Peebles, Don was now back at the age of 78 doing something no one thought would happen. He was reclaiming his career as a solo artist, and he was doing it on his own terms. It all started with the release of his album Don't Give Up on Love in 2017. Now, you won't believe this. This wasn't just any album. For starters, it was his first solo release in 48 years. That's right. 48 years had passed since Don Bryant last made a solo album. Think about that for a second. 48 years! A whole generation of music lovers had grown up without hearing Don's voice, and yet here he was, coming back stronger than ever. The album was a huge success, not just because of the nostalgia factor, but because of the raw soul and emotion Don poured into every track. The critics loved it, and fans couldn't get enough. But let me tell you, there was something even bigger that came from that comeback. A resurgence of a legend that nobody saw coming. But that's not all. Don's return to music wasn't just about putting out an album. It was about reigniting his passion for performing. For so many years, Don had been in the background, writing songs for others, supporting Anne, and working behind the scenes. But this was his moment to shine again. He was out there performing live, doing what he loved, and sharing his music with audiences who had waited decades to hear his voice. From Memphis to Morocco, from Italy to France, Don was touring the world, captivating audiences everywhere he went. The craziest part? His fans were not just the ones who had loved him in the 70s and 80s. They were a whole new generation of music lovers who were discovering his music for the first time. And the most unbelievable part? Despite his age, Don was able to perform with the same energy and passion that he had when he was younger. It was like he had turned back the clock. And it wasn't just his voice that captivated the audience. It was his stage presence. People who saw him live couldn't believe the connection he had with the crowd. They weren't just watching a legend, they were experiencing a musical experience that was alive and vibrant. This wasn't just about reliving the past. It was about creating something new, something fresh, and Don was doing that effortlessly. But what makes this comeback even more mind-blowing is the fact that Don wasn't just making a living from his music. He was redefining his legacy. After decades of being away from the spotlight, his music was still relevant and people still wanted to hear it. The success of his album and his tours proved that Don Bryant was more than just a soul singer. He was a timeless talent whose music would continue to inspire and captivate for generations. And the most inspiring part? Don wasn't doing it for the fame or the recognition. He was doing it for the love of the music, for the joy it gave him, and for the people who had supported him throughout his life. His fans weren't just people who admired him. They were family. But what happens when a legend like Don Bryant, who has experienced so much in life, faces the ultimate challenge? What happens when everything you've worked for, everything you've achieved, is put to the test? Well, that's where things take another twist. You won't believe what happens next, because while Don was in the middle of his revival, his health was starting to decline. Yes, despite his powerful comeback, Don was battling health issues that would eventually take him away from the stage he loved so much. The real shocker? Even though he was facing serious health problems, Don continued to perform. He didn't stop, even as his body began to tell him it was time to slow down. The drive he had to perform, to share his music with the world, was stronger than anything else. And what makes his story even more heart-wrenching is the fact that he was fighting not just for himself, but for his family, for his fans, and for his wife, Ann Peebles. Through it all, Don remained determined to keep doing what he loved until the very end. But here's the thing. Life doesn't always give us the luxury of time. And as Don's health began to deteriorate, his fans were left wondering how much time did he have left to keep performing. He had given so much of himself to the music world, and now, as he neared the end of his life, his legacy was in full bloom. And then, on December 26, 2025, the news broke. Don Bryant, at the age of 83, passed away after a long battle with health issues. The world was left in shock, mourning the loss of one of the greatest soul artists of all time. His death was a profound loss, not just for his fans, but for the entire music industry. But what makes this story even more emotional is the fact that Don's life and career had come full circle. He had given everything to his music, and in return, his music had given him something priceless, a legacy that would never be forgotten. But this is where it gets really emotional, because Don's passing was not just a loss for the music world, but for his wife, Ann Peebles, who had been by his side for decades. Ann had been his rock, his partner in life and in music, and now she was left to carry on without him. The craziest part? You won't believe the emotional tribute Ann gave to Don at his funeral. Now, things are about to take a heartbreaking turn. The world of soul music was forever changed on December 26, 2025, when Don Bryant passed away after a long battle with health issues. He was 83. His death was not just the loss of a musical icon. It was the loss of a man whose soul touched the hearts of so many, and whose journey was filled with love, music, and a legacy that spanned decades. But what makes this story truly heartbreaking is the impact of Don's passing on the one person who knew him better than anyone else, his wife, Ann Peebles. Ann, the woman who had been by Don's side for over 4 decades, wasn't just his wife. She was his partner in every sense of the word. Their lives had intertwined so completely that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. They had shared everything, the highs, the lows, the struggles, and the triumphs. And when Don passed away, it wasn't just a loss for the music world, it was a loss for Ann, who had spent so many years supporting him, loving him, and creating beautiful music together. At Don's funeral, Ann stood before the world and delivered one of the most emotional tributes anyone could ever imagine. It wasn't just a eulogy, it was a love letter. A final farewell to the man she had spent her life with. Her words, though heartbreaking, were filled with love and gratitude for the time they had shared. She spoke not only of the man Don had been to her, but of the musician, the artist, and the soul who had touched so many lives through his music. You won't believe the power in Ann's words, the raw emotion, the love, and the pain in her voice. As she spoke of their time together, the struggles they had faced, and the music they had created, it was clear that this was no ordinary tribute. This was a woman saying goodbye to the love of her life, to the man who had stood by her side through thick and thin. It was a tribute that made the entire room, and indeed the world, stop and reflect on the beauty of their relationship and the profound impact Don had on those around him. Ann spoke of how much Don loved his fans, how he cherished every moment he spent performing, and how much joy he took in sharing his music with the world. She reminded everyone of the incredible legacy he left behind. A legacy not just in his music, but in the hearts of the people he touched. It wasn't just about the hits he wrote or the albums he released. It was about the soul he put into every note, every word, and every performance. Don's music was his gift to the world, and it was a gift that would live on forever. But here's the truly heartbreaking part. As Ann stood there speaking about her love for Don, it was clear that this wasn't just a farewell to a husband. It was a farewell to a life they had built together, to the man who had been her everything. The love they shared was evident in every word Ann spoke, and in that moment, it felt as though the entire world was mourning with her. You could feel the depth of her loss, and you could feel the love that would never fade. The tribute wasn't just a goodbye. It was a celebration of everything Don Bryant had stood for. His music, his legacy, and his love for Ann would never be forgotten. And as Ann stood there, honoring her late husband, it was clear that Don's influence would continue to shape the world of soul music for years to come. But what's even more incredible is the fact that Don had always believed in the power of his music, even as his health began to decline. He never stopped performing, never stopped creating, and never stopped loving the craft that had defined his life. His death may have left a hole in the music world, but his legacy will continue to live on through his songs, through the memories of his performances, and through the love he shared with Ann. And as we say goodbye to Don Bryant, we remember the lessons his life taught us. He showed us that it's never too late to pursue your passion, that love can overcome any obstacle, and that music has the power to transcend time. Don Bryant's life may have come to an end, but his story will live on in the hearts of those who were touched by his soul. The craziest part? His music will never die. It will continue to inspire, to heal, and to remind us of the power of love and music. And as we say goodbye to Don, we do so knowing that his legacy is forever etched in the world of soul music.